All right, welcome in Ethan Skolnick, starting 9 here on a Thursday morning. The Miami Heat do not play tonight. They play Orlando on Friday, but we're going to talk about the Heat today here on the program. We will take some of your comments as they come in. We know it's early. We don't get it quite as many as we get in the evening session. Make sure that you check out our stream from last night. Myself, Greg Sylvander, and Brian Fonseca did a stream looking 2 weeks ahead to the trade deadline as the Miami Heat looked to possibly make a move, put a bunch of rumors on there. Also took a lot of questions from viewers, maybe 20 or 30 questions about players that the Heat may be targeting. We talked about guys like Jared Vanderbilt, Kelly Olynyk, Nerlens Noel, which may not be the most exciting to some Heat fans, but also some of the other options like an OG Anunoby. Could the Heat get in on that? John Collins and the like. So check out that stream. We also put it on the podcast feed. So if you don't subscribe to Five on the Floor, make sure you do, because, of course, we do a lot of podcasts there that don't originate from this channel. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. And I do want to mention one more sponsor before we get started here. It's Prize Picks. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E. Get your initial deposit matched up to $100. Go to prizepicks.com. Get that code in there, and you will get your matched up to $100. You put down 20 if you want, and they'll give you 20. But again, there are no rollovers. And yes, this is legal in the state of Florida and many other states. So you got the props. Again, on not just NBA, but also NFL coming up this weekend. Look for a show with David Eversole, David Friedman, and myself getting you ready for the championship games coming up on Sunday. And also, as I said, you play 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players together. You can play players from different sports together, flex play, power play. They got all kinds of features on there, but it's really, really easy to use. So go to Prize Picks. Use that code 5, F-I-V-E. Yesterday, we gave out $100 in free Prize Picks funds to a subscriber on Off the Floor. All right, let's get to it today. And I want to get away from the trade deadline stuff, although obviously this will play into it somewhat, and just appreciate what's going on right now with Bam Adebayo, because we do this thing in the media and on Twitter and just generally as fans or observers where we kind of make demands of a player and we complain when the player doesn't reach the standard that we've set. But then when they do reach it, we're like, okay, we're just going to take that for granted. And I don't think we should do that this year with Bam Adebayo, because in his 6th season, he's become the player that we were projecting and hoping he would be, in the sense that he's gotten out of his own head. Because defensively, that wasn't an issue. He just plays. He knows where to go. He has great instincts. He can guard anybody 1 through 5. We've talked about that. We talked about the Bam lesson when he gets out on a perimeter player like a Trae Young or a John Morant or pretty much anybody in the league that's not somebody you want to go against. Tyrese Halliburton learned that lesson for Indiana. So defensively, it's instinct. He just, again, goes. But on offense, you have to think. You have to think because you're working with 4 other players there, and who is going to get the ball in what spot, and who's going to take the best possible shot on that possession. And am I going to step on somebody else's toes? You don't worry about that defensively. The more aggressive you are defensively, the better, right? Because you're in support of a teammate. You're on a string. You're trying to cover for what they may not be able to cover in that situation. But on offense, it's different. The more that you do, sometimes the worse it's perceived, because it's perceived that maybe you're trying to take shots from someone else or trying to be the man, and it changes the whole flow of the offense, and it changes the dynamic in the locker room, right? We never talk about defense and this idea of who's going to be the man for the Heat defensively. No, you want them all to be, right? With certain guys anchoring. But we do talk about that on offense. We've talked about that all the time. Even in LeBron Dwayne years, who's going to take the last shot, right? Recently, Jimmy, Tyler, who's going to take the last shot? Offense is something where there is ego involved the more that you do. And so I believe that one of the reasons that Bam didn't take this step until this season was not that he was afraid to take the step, but that he's not that type of personality. He's not a strong alpha personality. We're surprised when he says something like, I belong in Salt Lake, because it's not really him. I know he's auditioned, he's campaigned a little bit to be Defensive Player of the Year and all that, but it's not really his way. As I've said many times before, Bam was never really the best player on his team growing up. He's not in like an AAU superstar, or he's not like, I make the comparison a lot to Alonzo Mourning, because they are the 2 best defensive bigs in Miami Heat history. Sorry, Shaq, PJ Brown, others. Those are the 2, right? I think there's a legitimate debate now to say if Bam is the best defensive player in Miami Heat history. It's a conversation. But the thing I talk about with Zoe is when Zoe got to the Heat, he was 25. He was the same age that Bam is now. Think about that. Zoe came to the Heat. He was the same age that Bam is now after his time in Charlotte. But Zoe was like the best player in the country as a high school player. Zoe was second. This comes in from Randy Chambers. Bam, Jimmy, and LeBron next year is going to be crazy. LeBron loves Bam. Zoe came in, and he was supposed to be that all the way through. He was the next in the line of centers at Georgetown. He was heavily, heavily recruited. He would have been the number one pick in any other draft if Shaquille O'Neal was not in that draft. Bam has never been that. Bam wasn't the best player on his college team by far. And so it has taken him a little time to kind of, I think, in some ways, realize how good he is, realize that he has the right to take the 15 shots per game that Pat Riley wanted him to take. And he's now averaging almost 17 shots a game with an uptick in free throws, without really a big decrease in assists, while continuing to rebound, while continuing to defend, and while scoring more points from a certain point on the floor, and this came from Kirk Goldsberry, than any other player in the league. It's kind of from right inside the free throw line. He has become essentially the best paint scorer in the league. And he's not 7'2". Everybody says he's an undersized center. So I think a lot of this is just in his head, and it was all along. And it was just, okay, was he ever going to unlock that? And now that he is, I think there's a reasonable conversation to be had about whether or not you pivot in terms of the way that you approach this team going forward. Because all of this has been about Jimmy's window. And Jimmy has done nothing to deserve his window to close except not playing enough. I said before the year, Jimmy will never play 70 games again. He's not going to get to 60 this year. And so if that's the case, can you build a team around that player's strengths when you don't know how often he's going to play and he's the older player? So I agree with those who say that Jimmy deserves the best possible opportunity with this team. And that means that the Heat should make a move at this deadline. And I know they don't want to go into the tax. And again, we talked last night about all of the possibilities. Jimmy deserves it, but the move shouldn't be made for Jimmy. That's the difference. The move should be made for Bam. If you're going to make a move at this deadline, it has to be a player who makes Bam's life easier. That, to me, is all this is about. And it has to be a player, in my view, because I don't think they're winning a championship no matter who they acquire this season. It has to be a player that you want to keep for the long term who can play with Bam. So, yes, you can go get a Kelly Olynyk because we know he can play with Bam, and we know that's basically a rental. That's fine. That's not going to cost you too much. But don't go spend too much on a player who is not a great fit with Bam. You need someone who either is going to be and they're not getting this guy because he's not available, but a Steven Adams-like dirty work type player so that Bam doesn't have to do some of that stuff and Bam can float and be athletic and do all the things that he does best. Okay, adding a rim protector back there, even though we know that Spo is probably going to go small when it matters anyway, but at least pockets of the game, they can play together. And you need a guy who, until Bam decides that he's going to step out a little further, can space. Because this team doesn't have enough shooting. And if they had more shooting, it would make Bam's life a lot easier. Because I do think the next evolution for Bam, it's not the three-point shot. It's the post game. I think that the post game is where he needs to work this offseason. He worked heavily, you can tell, on the mid-range game. And someone made a good point on Twitter, and I hate not to attribute this, but that what Bam is doing now is perfect for the playoffs. In the playoffs, this whole thing, the analytics thing, which is it applies in the regular season. You know, get dunks or layups or get threes, right? Nothing in between. But in the playoffs, teams take away that stuff a lot more. And we have seen that you need to make mid-range shots. Kawhi Leonard has proved that. Others have proved that. If you can operate in that mid-range space, you become much more dangerous in the postseason. Yes, they're worth 2 instead of 3, but they're available. And Bam has become the best on the Heat at those available shots. Tyler's got a mid-range game too. Tyler has a top 5 floater in the league, right behind Nikola Jokic, actually, according to the metrics. But that spot, just around the free throw line, that's there all the time. It's there all the time. They're going to give that to you in the playoffs. And they gave it to Bam. And Bam wouldn't take the shot against Brook. And now he is. And so, again, the point I'm trying to make here is this build has to be around Bam. And I'm looking at some of the stuff that's coming in. This comes in from NapGod. Mo Bamba should be a target. Names come up a lot. I agree with that because I think he's cheap. He obviously has upside. We've seen what the Heat have done with developmental guys who don't have that kind of upside. You're talking about a former first-round pick. And Orlando doesn't really need him. They have so many bigs of different kinds of quality, different skill sets that they can part with him. And it does seem like he's fallen out of favor in large degree there. So I would take a flyer on someone like that. Let's get to a couple of the other comments here. But again, that's my basic point today is that this has to be a BAM build now. It's not because Jimmy did anything wrong. It's just where this thing is going and where he's taking it. This comes in. I know discussing someone else's money may be frowned upon, but what point do we take into consideration the CCL situation and how it affects building a contender? Well, I started talking about this 2 years ago. I think I was the first in the market. I mean, full disclosure, I own the stock. Okay. Not from that point. Trust me. Okay. I've nibbled a little since. But yeah, it plays into it. I don't think there's any question. I mean, we can talk about someone still being a billionaire, and I understand that. And I understand that, you know, he has assets in a whole bunch of different places. But the luxury tax conversation has pretty much been a non-starter this year. Like, it's not like, oh, we're going to go into the tax. It has been, we're not going to pay the tax. Okay, unless there's, well, I shouldn't say it completely. I mean, if they got a superstar and they believe they win a championship, they would. But anything short of that, they're just not going to pay it. And I mean, you can't tell me that there's no correlation whatsoever. And add to that the fact, okay, that the FTX thing, which I don't believe, and again, I don't want to speak out of turn here because, you know, I'm not a financial expert. I haven't looked at the books. I don't know how one thing affects another. But the black eye of the FTX thing is not helpful either. It's just been a rough year with that kind of stuff, with things associated with the Miami Heat franchise. It's not been smooth sailing this year. Does FTX prevent them from getting somebody? Probably not. Again, I don't know the correlation there, but I'm just saying the CCL thing, which of course is Carnival Cruise Line stock, which has gone from the 60s down to single digits. You can't tell me when someone, you know, made his fortune on that business and is still a major shareholder that has nothing to do with it. For people who don't know that situation, the Saudis bought 11% of that company, and I think they're actually down since they bought it. All right, let's get to some more basketball talk here because this is not CNBC. I apologize, but let's get into a couple of these. Rashawn Robinson, why didn't Jimmy get his knee fixed during the offseason and make the playoffs with Jimmy's knee flare up again? I was told during the offseason that it was not something that required surgery. Here's my understanding of his particular injury with the knee. First thing, the last time he was out, I was told it was more about the back than the knee, even though it was reported as the knee. Okay. What the knee issue is he has an IT band issue in his knee. I tore my ACL. I've had a couple of surgeries. Okay. So I'm familiar with this. It's kind of on the side of your knee. And what happens is it just flares up and it gets extraordinarily sore. So it's not a long-term, like he's not going to be able to walk again type issue. It's just a pain management situation and an inflammation management situation. And so if I was to tell you that it won't flare up again, I would be lying. It could flare up again. Absolutely. But it's not like go in and, you know, just clean out some cartilage or, you know, do what Robert Williams did, which I think is going to hurt his career, and actually take out the cartilage. Or it's not that. That's not my understanding of it. And it's not a torn ACL or a torn MCL or a torn PCL or any of that stuff. So it absolutely could flare up again in the playoffs, which is why they've been meeting with doctors and trying to manage it as best as they can. And that's why he wasn't playing back-to-backs. All right, a couple more comments here, Manny. We'll take 2 or 3 more as we close here. Sid, 14E, do you think Strus or Gabe will be kept and extended in the offseason? We're going to do a full episode on this. I think one of them could be traded in the right deal. I do think as a sweetener for a team. I've been told that Max will command more on the open market than Gabe will. I think the Heat are more likely to retain Gabe. I think at a reasonable cost. If you were to tell me which direction they would go. Now, I know everybody says, well, Strus hasn't shot the ball that well this year. I had an agent tell me he's going to get $80 million. I don't know about that. Okay. But I know that the Heat are not going to overpay for a shooter again, even if the shooter is more versatile than the last shooter that they overpaid. So my guess is that Max ends up elsewhere and Gabe resigns for less. That would, not less than he's making now, but less than he might get on the open market if he's promised a chance to compete for the starting job. It's similar to Anthony Carter a whole bunch of years ago when Tim Hardaway was declining. Let's take 2 more, Manny, if we can here. Brom, which position do you think will benefit Bam more? You think getting a 4 to have someone complimentary, getting a 5 and have Bam at 4 instead? The reality is I wish that they could get both. Because I think that they were most effective in the bubble season when they did have Myers Leonard as a placeholder, and he was a spacer, which changed the situation a little bit. And then Bam could play the 4, and then have Bam play the 5 when it mattered. I think that's what they would like the most. And I think that was kind of the plan with Yurt, actually. But that didn't work out. I think anybody you look for in a 4 at this point, if you're going to go up any kind of significant asset, that player, I wouldn't be comparing that player to Caleb Martin now. As much as they like Caleb, I think there's a recognition of kind of moving Caleb back to his natural swing position. I think you have to compare him to how much better is he than what Haywood Highsmith provided the other night. Like, is the player you're getting that much of an upgrade that it's worth giving up a significant asset? And I'm not saying Haywood Highsmith is the answer, but I'm saying Haywood Highsmith did a lot of the things the other night that you want someone to do next to Bam. It's just with someone like that, what's the upside there and what's the consistency level? All right, last one. And again, we appreciate all the comments. We don't get to all of them, but we certainly see them, and I know everybody else sees them as well. Someone's asking, when will Jovic return? I was told he's still a couple of weeks out. So that comes in from Mark Craven. I was told still a couple of weeks out. He may never return. He may be included at the trade deadline. Talking to our panel yesterday, everybody seems to agree that Jovic would be worth more to the Heat than the 2023 pick, but the 2023 pick would be worth more than Jovic to another team. So I'll let you guys figure out why. And then this one from Napgod, I'll finish with this one. In my opinion, Manu will be selling high on Martin, and they should be trying to move Strus or Gabe, preferably Strus. I do think, as much as they like the undrafted guys and they have undrafted T-shirts, I believe a lesson has been learned here. Okay? These guys, these undrafteds, first thing, they can always find another because they're the best in the world at it. Okay? And, we obviously saw with Whiteside and Tyler Johnson and others that they overpaid. Nobody gets better after they leave Miami, which has created kind of a problem because the league knows this. And so it's hard to trade some of these guys because they know they're going to fall off a cliff when they leave the Heat's developmental system. In a sense, the Heat have been a victim of their own success, not just with that, but with the fact that people don't value the Heat's first-round picks as much as other teams' first-round picks because they know the Heat never tanks, so those first-round picks are not worth as much as a tanking team, even, with light protections, that may be. So I think but I do think the Heat have learned their lesson in terms of overpaying guys. And I think this season in some ways has been instructive because kind of all of the undrafted guys have kind of topped a little. Some of it is role. Some of it with Gabe was early in the season, was injury related, but they've all kind of topped. And we know that Duncan topped. And so I don't think that they're going to be fooled by their own success kind of generating as much as they could before. All right, thanks to everybody. You guys all saw the ad at the top of the show. So if you know somebody who's interested in moving to Panama or just getting a great vacation spot there and doing some fishing, check that out. Prize Picks, use the code 5FIV. Thanks to Manny Chang, our producer. Everybody have a good day.